In October 1347, 12 Genoese galleys docked in the Sicilian port of Messina. They carried a cargo that would change the world, the Yersinia pestis bacterium. In our timeline, this outbreak, known as the Black Death, raged for 4 years, killing up to 60% of Europe before receding in 1351. Humanity survived, rebuilt, and eventually flourished. But history hangs by a thread. In this timeline, we ask the terrifying question: what if the plague didn't stop? What if the bacterium mutated, becoming resistant to the cold, and continued its harvest until the old world was nothing but a graveyard? The divergence point begins in the winter of 1351. Historically, the extreme cold of the Little Ice Age hampered the flea populations that carried the plague, giving humanity a respite. In our scenario, a genetic mutation occurs within the flea vector, allowing it to hibernate and survive sub-zero temperatures. Instead of the death toll tapering off, the winter of 1351 becomes the season of the black snow. The plague doesn't retreat. It hibernates in the thatch of peasant roofs and the furs of nobility alike, waiting to explode with renewed virulence the moment the spring thaw begins.
By 1352, Italy ceases to function as a political entity. In our timeline, cities like Venice and Florence lost half their citizens but maintained order. Here, the second wave hits a population already on its knees. The death rate climbs to 80% in urban centers. The intricate banking systems of the Medici ancestors collapse instantly. Venice, the jewel of the Mediterranean, becomes a necropolis. The Doge dies, and no election is held to replace him. The canals, once arteries of trade, stagnate, choked with the unburied dead. The Renaissance is strangled in its crib before it can ever draw its first breath. The spiritual, psychological toll is absolute. The Catholic Church was the bedrock of medieval life, but in 1353, the papacy in Avignon falls. Pope Clement VI dies, not of old age, but of the boils. The cardinals gathered to elect a successor, but the conclave itself becomes a super-spreader event. One by one, the princes of the church succumb within the locked walls. When the doors are finally forced open weeks later, there is no new pope, only silence. The centralized authority of Christendom evaporates. The local priests tell their flocks that God has not just punished humanity, but abandoned it entirely.
With no religious authority to promise salvation and no nobility to enforce law, the feudal system disintegrates by 1354. The social contract of the Middle Ages relied on labor, but there is no labor left. The few surviving peasants realize that the land belongs to no one. They stop farming for their lords and begin foraging for survival. The concept of serfdom vanishes, not through revolution, but through attrition. Castles, once impregnable fortresses of power, become stone tombs. Without servants to heat them or guards to man the walls, the great keeps of England, France, and Germany go cold. By 1355, the panic reaches Paris. The French crown attempts to quarantine the city, sealing the gates. It is a death sentence for everyone inside. The city turns on itself. With food supplies cut off, the frantic population riots. The distinction between the infected and the healthy blurs. The royal family, attempting to flee to the countryside, is intercepted by a mob who no longer fear the king's justice, only the king's sickness. The Capetian dynamism that built France dissolves into anarchy. Paris, the most populous city in the West, is reduced to a smoldering ruin within months. 1356 marks the biological end of the divine right of kings. The plague cares nothing for blue blood. In this timeline, the pestilence breaches the isolated retreats of the aristocracy. The House of Plantagenet in England, the House of Valois in France, and the early Habsburgs are wiped out entirely. There are no heirs, no distant cousins, no pretenders to the throne. The complex web of marriages and alliances that held Europe together snaps. Without lines of succession, nations cease to exist. Borders become meaningless lines on maps that no one is left to read. 1357 is known as the year of the Great Burning. The survivors, driven mad by grief and terror, convince themselves that fire is the only cleansing agent. Across the continent, villages, forests, and entire towns are torched in a desperate bid to kill the miasma in the air. This ecological arson destroys the grain stores for the coming winter. The smoke from burning Europe is so thick it is said to have dimmed the sun as far away as Cairo. The plague does not burn, but the civilization that hosted it turns to ash.
In a final spasm of organized activity, a last crusade is launched in 1358, not to reclaim Jerusalem, but to flee the continent entirely. Rumors spread of a plague-free Eden in Iceland, or perhaps the Canaries. Thousands of desperate survivors crowd onto leaking vessels, but they bring the rats with them. These ghost ships drift into the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, floating coffins that will never reach a safe harbor. This marks the end of European maritime capability for the next 400 years. The oceans become barriers once again. By 1360, the noise of Europe stops. The screaming, the praying, and the warring cease. The mortality rate has hit 95%. The bacterium has burned through the available host population to such an extent that it struggles to find new victims. The survivors are isolated hermits, hiding in caves or deep forests, terrified of human contact. The era of the Black Death ends not because of a cure, but because there is no one left to kill. A silence falls over the continent, deeper and more profound than any since the last ice age.
The plague did not spare the East. The Yuan dynasty in China, already unstable, faces an apocalypse. In our history, the plague contributed to their fall. Here, it eradicates the population base required to overthrow them. The Red Turban Rebellion never happens because the rebels are dead. Instead, the vast Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, simply evaporates. The courier stations of the Yam system fall silent. The Khans die in their tents. The connection between East and West is severed completely. China enters a period of profound isolation and demographic collapse. The Silk Road becomes the longest graveyard in the world. For thousands of miles, from Xi'an to Antioch, the trade outposts are ghost towns. The mechanism of global trade halts. Innovations like gunpowder, the compass, and printing, which were slowly migrating west, are lost in the sands. The intellectual cross-pollination that fueled the medieval world ends. Humanity is fragmenting into isolated pockets, forgetting the knowledge of what lies beyond the horizon. The global economy doesn't just crash, it ceases to exist. Constantinople, the second Rome, falls in 1362. But it does not fall to the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans themselves are decimated in Anatolia before they can assemble their empire. The great walls of the Theodosian land defenses are unmanned. The city is taken by nature. The library of the Byzantines, holding the last secrets of the ancient Greeks and Romans, is left to mold and decay. There will be no scholars fleeing to Italy to spark a renaissance. The knowledge of antiquity is locked in a dying city, waiting to be eaten by worms. The Islamic Golden Age, which had preserved mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, comes to a jagged halt. Cairo, the largest city in the world west of China, becomes a tomb. The Mamluk Sultanate collapses. The intricate irrigation systems of Mesopotamia, which required constant maintenance by thousands of laborers, fail. The Tigris and Euphrates burst their banks, turning the cradle of civilization into a swamp. The intellectual light of the House of Wisdom is extinguished, not by Mongols this time, but by the microscopic Yersinia pestis.
However, the geography of the world offers a shield. The Sahara Desert becomes the Great Wall of Africa. While North Africa is devastated, the trade routes across the sand are severed. The plague struggles to cross the hyper-arid zone. Sub-Saharan Africa, the Kingdom of Mali, and the city-states of the Swahili coast are spared the worst of the direct infection. They suffer economically from the loss of trade partners, but their populations remain intact. The center of gravity for human civilization begins to shift south, unbeknownst to the dying north. In the east, Japan observes the catastrophe on the mainland and enacts the Sakoku, or closed country policy, nearly 300 years early, but with absolute ruthlessness. Any ship approaching the Japanese archipelago is burned at sea. Japan saves itself through total xenophobia. They preserve their culture, their samurai code, and their population, but they turn inward completely. They become a time capsule, watching the smoke rise from the Asian continent, believing the rest of the world has been cursed by the gods. By 1400, 40 years after the Great Dying, the environment begins to respond. This is the beginning of the Great Rewilding. With 99% of the human population gone, the pressure on the natural world vanishes. Forests that had been cut down for centuries explode back into existence. The Colosseum in Rome becomes a hanging garden. The canals of Venice run clear and are filled with fish. Without human hunting, animal populations skyrocket. Wolves, bears, and boars reclaim the seas. Europe is no longer the land of Christendom, it is the land of the beast. London is a forest. The wooden houses have long since rotted away, leaving only the stone shells of churches and the Tower of London, now overgrown with ivy. The Thames, undredged and uncontrolled, widens and creates vast wetlands. The air quality, once choked with wood smoke and coal, is pristine. The carbon footprint of humanity drops to near zero. While this is a tragedy for the human species, for the biosphere, it is a golden age. The scars of 2,000 years of agriculture are healed in a single century.
The sudden reforestation of Europe and Asia sucks billions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This accelerates the Little Ice Age. Winters become brutal. The Baltic Sea freezes solid for months. The glaciers of the Alps advance, crushing the remains of mountain villages. The climate becomes hostile to the few human survivors, forcing them to migrate south or perish. The plague bacterium eventually goes dormant in the permafrost, having done its work. The earth has cooled, effectively sterilizing the wound. By 1450, humanity in Europe is no longer the apex predator. The few thousand survivors are scattered, living in small, fortified tribal groups. They have forgotten how to forge steel. They scavenge metal from the old ones. They are hunted by packs of wolves that have grown fearless and massive. The nights are dark and terrifying. There is no reading, no writing, no history. Only the oral tradition of a time when men were gods who commanded stone and fire, and the great death that punished them for their hubris.
Evolution takes the wheel. The survivors of this timeline are not random. They are the descendants of those with the Delta 32 mutation, a genetic quirk that provided immunity to the plague. The European gene pool goes through an extreme bottleneck. The resulting population is incredibly robust, disease-resistant, but genetically homogeneous. Natural selection has been jump-started. The humans of 1500 are physically stronger and have more robust immune systems than their ancestors, but they have lost the cultural software of civilization. These tribes are the immune. They inhabit the shells of the old cities during the summer and migrate south in the winter. They view the great cathedrals not as places of worship, but as haunted structures built by giants. Christianity morphs into a strange folk religion based on survival and fear of the sickness. The Latin language is extinct. The knowledge of the Greeks, the Romans, and the medieval scholastics is gone. Humanity in Europe has been reset to the Iron Age.
The loss of literacy is the final nail in the coffin of the old world. In our timeline, the printing press was invented in 1440. In this timeline, Gutenberg was never born. Without books, knowledge can only be passed down from father to son. Complex metallurgy, architecture, and mathematics degrade with every generation. By 1550, a descendant of a French king is indistinguishable from a Neolithic hunter spearing fish in the Seine, unaware that his ancestors once built the Notre Dame that looms above him. But while Europe sleeps, the other side of the world is waking up. We cross the Atlantic to the Americas. In our history, 1492 marked the beginning of the end for indigenous American civilizations due to the introduction of smallpox and influenza. But in this timeline, there is no Columbus. There are no Spanish galleons. The biological weapon that decimated the New World never arrives. The civilizations of the Aztecs, the Maya, and the Inca are left in splendid isolation to develop on their own trajectory.
By 1550, Tenochtitlan is the largest, most prosperous city on Earth. The Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance, stabilizes. Without the disruption of the Spanish, they solve their internal political issues. They continue to refine their agriculture, their astronomy, and their engineering. They do not have steel or gunpowder, but they have obsidian and complex mathematics. They build a civilization based on biology and stone, sustainable and immense. The population of the Valley of Mexico swells to millions. To the south, the Inca Empire consolidates the Andes. They are the Romans of the New World. Their road system, the Capac Ñan, stretches for 25,000 miles, superior to anything in ruined Europe. They develop a complex system of record-keeping using quipus, knotted strings, that becomes a full written language. They master bronze working. The Inca socialism manages food distribution so effectively that famine is unknown. While Europe is a frozen forest, the Andes are a humming machine of imperial efficiency.
Technological progress looks different here. Without horses or oxen, the Americas focus on hydraulic engineering, selective breeding of plants, corn, potatoes, and medicine. They likely discover the principles of inoculation on their own, perhaps experimenting with herbal remedies. They don't build machines, they terraform mountains. By 1600, the Inca and Aztec empires have established trade routes connecting the two continents. A canoe-based trade network spans from the Mississippi to the Amazon. By 1700, the great northern tribes, the Iroquois and the Mississippian cultures, adopt agriculture and city building from the Aztecs. A cultural exchange zone creates a continuous band of civilization from the Great Lakes to the Andes. North America becomes a patchwork of powerful, fortified city-states. They begin to experiment with bronze and copper weaponry. They are not peaceful utopias. They wage wars for captives and tribute, but they are sovereign, powerful, and rising.
For 500 years, the Atlantic Ocean remains a barrier. The Columbian Exchange never happens. There are no tomatoes in Italy, no potatoes in Ireland, no horses in America. The ecological separation of the hemispheres continues. This delay allows the American populations to build up a natural resistance to some local diseases and allows their population numbers to rival that of ancient China. They are a powder keg of human potential waiting for a spark. The spark comes in the mid-18th century. The Aztecs, needing resources and tribute, turn their eyes to the sea. They improve their ship designs, moving from coastal canoes to large balsa wood and reed rafts with cotton sails, capable of deep ocean travel. They follow the currents, not east to west, but west to east. The Gulf Stream pulls them. Aztec explorers, adorned in jaguar skins and obsidian armor, set sail into the rising sun, looking for the land of their myths.
In 1790, an Aztec expeditionary fleet sights land. It is not the bustling port of Lisbon they find, but a wild, green coast. They land on the beaches of Portugal. They find ruins, ancient stone towers covered in vines. They encounter the locals, pale, bearded savages speaking a guttural dialect, wielding spears tipped with rusted iron scraps. The Aztecs are confused. They expected gods or monsters. They found ghosts. The discovery of Europe is a shock to the American empires. They explore the ruins of the Old World with the fascination of archaeologists. They find the remnants of the Roman aqueducts and the Gothic cathedrals, realizing that a great civilization once existed here and destroyed itself. They view the White Plague lands as cursed. The Aztecs do not colonize Europe for gold. They colonize it for curiosity and for iron. They realize the rusted scraps are a metal harder than their bronze.
A reverse colonization begins. The Aztecs establish outposts in Spain and West Africa. They bring maize and potatoes to the Old World, finally kickstarting a population recovery in the feral tribes of Europe. But the power dynamic is permanently inverted. The Americas are the center of the world. Europe is the frontier. The New World is actually the Old World to them. The history books are written in Nahuatl and Quechua. By 1850, the Incas excavate the ruins of Paris. They find caches of old weapons, perhaps even early gunpowder formulas preserved in sealed jars. They begin to reverse engineer the technology of the ancestors. But they develop it differently. Without the aggressive, competitive drive of European nation-states, the development of firearms is slow. The world avoids the horrors of industrial warfare. There is no WW1, no WW2. The 20th century is peaceful, slower, and greener.
We arrive at the modern day. The world of 2024 is unrecognizable. The global population is 2 billion, not 8 billion. The dominant religions are descendants of the sun god cults and earth worship. The climate crisis never happened. The Earth is 2 degrees cooler than in our timeline. Technology is biological. Medicine and genetics are advanced, but mechanics and electronics are primitive. We have cured cancer, but we have never been to the moon. Civilization is centered in Mexico City, Cuzco, and Timbuktu. Europe is a vast national park, a place where wealthy tourists go on safari to see the wild tribes and the ruins of the lost age. English is a dead language, studied only by a few eccentric scholars. The global culture is communal, deeply spiritual, and terrified of disease. The trauma of the Black Death is the foundational myth of humanity, engraved in the collective consciousness.
In this timeline, humanity sacrificed progress for survival. We lost the stars, the internet, and the symphony of the modern age. But we gained a planet that is still breathing. We avoided the cliff edge of climate collapse and nuclear war. The price was 500 years of darkness and the death of billions. Was it a fair trade? History is a series of rolling dice. In 1351, the dice landed on survival. In this story, they landed on silence. The Black Plague was the greatest reaper humanity ever faced. In our world, it forced us to innovate, to question authority, and to rebuild stronger. But if it had kept spreading, it would have hit the reset button on the human species. We would have returned to the garden, but we would have entered it through the gates of hell. This is the legacy of the Yersinia pestis, a reminder of how fragile our dominance over this planet truly is.